Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We're back some more to talk about music primarily. And I would say basically today's subject will be about the music makers, the profession, the music field, going into it in the old days and the past, the recent times when things were fine and rolling along, and now in the future, I guess, post-COVID, etc. In the old days, immigrants came to America playing the violin from all over the world, and they used the violin to join the masses of people enjoying a new chance for entertainment. People were working very hard. You'll hear the fire ambulance going by. We're here in New York City, and it gets noisy at times. Radiators and fire trucks, and sometimes interruptions. People come in and start talking to me. One man came in recently in the middle of one of our little shooting sessions and sat down after knocking over one of the cameras and proceeded to tell me about his recent visit to the dentist. And that was kind of amazing, kind of funny. And then on his way out, he knocked the camera over again. Anyway, all I'm saying is he's a wonderful man. I love seeing him, but it was kind of funny how he interrupted and how there's many interruptions in New York if you're not careful. So bear with us with the occasional siren. And my plants are dying. I'm sorry that I watered them, we take care of them, but they don't like it necessarily at this point. We have to do something to either try to help them along or say c'est la vie. Back to our subject. I'll try to concentrate. Let me think, where was I? Oh yes, in the old days people worked very hard just to survive, and they really had no time for entertainment or that kind of thing. But here in America, there was new developments. There were certainly vaudeville, and there was silent movies that needed music in the background, dramatic piano playing perhaps, and there was then eventually there was live performances of orchestras, bands, popular music. The big club date bands were popular, and all of that. Then came movies and television. And through all these developments, the violinist or violist or pianist, whatever, had to adjust to the new field. I remember many years ago, even here in New York City, there was lots of recording sessions for violinists and violists and cellists. They called them sweetening sessions. They would add the strings to sweeten up a song. But when they invented the synthesizer, all of the string section demos, demonstration recordings, and sweetening sessions were canceled. And the synthesizer player could play all of the string parts on one keyboard, and they could write their name down as string section and woodwind section, etc. And productions were much cheaper in that regard, but it replaced many people. Of course, the live bands and orchestras on the radio stations were fired. They began using recordings. They could play records, and there was no problem. So they paid some royalties, apparently, to the authors of those records, the composers, but the musicians themselves were not recompensed. In the meantime, things were busy in New York City and Los Angeles and certain places, and there were orchestras. London and Paris had 2 or 3 orchestras. They had opera houses, and music was good, and things were expanding. Lately, it's been tough because the conservatories are churning out lots of musicians, including string players, every year. Every 2 or 3 or 4 years, people graduate and they join the job market, so to speak. So for a while, they were putting string quartets into colleges, and they would graduate, and then they would of course have a resident quartet in colleges to teach, and that gave 4 players a job. And they would teach chamber music, they would teach quartets, and they would teach privately, and so quartets began to get placed into different colleges around this country. Very likely the same was taking place in other countries. I think a lot of these technological developments that replaced a lot of string players and brass and woodwind players probably took place in other countries as well. I assume Europe was the same way, except in Europe, the governments support their classical music or their cultural arts. The governments apparently find that the cultural arts are very important to a civilized civilization, to a culture, and I think they have something which is correct and very helpful. In America, there are foundations and some support. There used to be this State Council of the Arts. I don't know if it still exists, but there were some foundations that did help the musicians, the classical musicians primarily. Now, again, if you're versatile and you can play something like this, melody from The Godfather. And the one before that was O Sole Mio. Or I think Elvis Presley sang that song also. He changed the name of it, the words, what's the name of that one? I forgot, but Elvis Presley sang that same melody. That was originally apparently Italian, called O Sole Mio. Oh, it's now or never, yeah, something like that. Anyway, so, where was it? Oh yes. Today, it's very hard to know how to raise a young musician and to know whether it's a very safe profession in the future. During COVID, we've closed all the orchestras and opera houses, no audiences, no Broadway shows, no this, no that. So is there going to be a nice future? I don't know. I think playing music is like speaking a language. The violin and the viola and some piano playing has really opened the door for me to meet lovely people, to travel the world, and I would recommend everyone studies some music. I think the world would be a much nicer place if everyone had music in common. And I mean every country in the world would teach some form of music that we could share together. I think it would make a very big difference to this world. But in this case, for a profession, I know lots of families wanted their children to become doctors or lawyers. Very rarely did a set of parents ever agree on having their kid become an actress or an actor or a professional musician. It's not necessarily a guaranteed life. When you're working, it's a very good job. Sometimes you work only in the evening. Sometimes you work only a few times per week. But if you're not working, there's very little protection for you. You have maybe no security. When you're out of work, you're broke. And when you're working, you do quite well. You can, depending on what part of the music field you're involved in. It's not as glamorous as it may seem. People who get on stage all dressed up and make wonderful performances have worked many, many, many hours behind the scenes. In fact, I once heard from somebody on television said, and I can't think of who it was, but he said, in order to look cool on stage, you have to spend many, many hours doing things which are not cool. You have to spend many hours just practicing over and over and over certain aspects of your playing. And it's not romantic, it's not exciting. You have to spend many hours practicing certain notes. I knew a man named Tasha Samaroff who did a lot of recordings in recording session world. And he said when he had a solo, a special slide between one note to the other note, he would practice it for hours. And when he got to the recording studio and recording session, and it was his turn to play that solo, it was terrific. But he said nobody knew how hard I worked on just those 2 or 3 notes, which were the solo. And it's also quite nerve-wracking. To be a professional musician means many times you're under pressure. I think they did some research on what is the most stressful job. And one of the most stressful jobs was a violinist in a symphony orchestra, because they had to synchronize their bowings, and they had to watch the conductor and look well on stage and be very uniformed in some sense. Lots of tension. And I think the other one was a traffic air controller. They had lots of tension, making sure the airplanes were not going to crash, and they all landed safely and were going on the correct routes, etc. Stress, traffic controllers and musicians in a symphony orchestra on stage. Lots of peer pressure, audience pressure, and to be a perfectionist, you have to work very hard. So the symphony orchestra jobs may pay well, they used to, in some large cities, but they are a very stressful type job. And personally, I'm not cut out to do that. But many players enjoy orchestral positions and the security which comes with them, steady job. And they sometimes teach at the local universities, and they really have quite a good existence as a professional musician in those cases. If you don't make the audition, and that's another subject we'll talk about someday, auditioning, but then you're out on the street, and maybe you're on the street corner trying to raise some money, and you're just like... So it's like, please help me, please have pity on the little street corner violinist, that kind of thing. Anyway, what else can I say? I wouldn't exchange my life and my musical background for anything personally. I'm very lucky. but I'm a little bit on the outside of mainstream society, which is an advantage in many ways, but also a very obvious disadvantage in many ways. I couldn't imagine myself as a computer programmer or maybe even driving a bus. Those are very respectable jobs. In a way, I wish I had a job. But in the meantime, I get to enjoy music and meeting wonderful people from all over the world and who appreciate music very much. So it's nice that you're interested in music and that you're curious and you come to the show and watch a little bit. So I wish you the best. And if you're playing an instrument, keep it up. Don't be discouraged. Keep practicing slowly and carefully. And make sure at some point you have the desire to share your music with other people who may need the healing, because music is quite healing. So all the best to you. Take care, everybody.